Had a chance to ask God one question, and you knew God was going to answer, what question would you ask him? Based on this survey, the number one question that people were saying they would love to ask God was, God, why is there pain and suffering in the world?
For decades, religious scholars, pastors, ministers, all clergy of all time, and philosophers have discussed and debated the reason for suffering and the presence of evil in this world. And to this day, still the question remains, if God is all-powerful and all-knowing, why do we still have suffering and evil in the world? Why can't just the powerful God, as we claim that he is, just stop evil? Both Muslims and Christians and many other traditions, faith traditions, have tried to present an answer. And today, in this episode, or in this video, I would like to present to you one of their debates, their arguments that they present for the reasons for suffering. I'm going to start with our Muslim brothers to see how the Islamic or the Islam faith presents arguments for the reason for the presence of evil and suffering. Let's go, starting with argument number one.
If you had a chance to ask God one question, and you knew God was going to answer, what question would you ask him? Based on this survey, the number one question that people were saying they would love to ask God was, God, why is there pain and suffering in the world? If you say God is good, God is mercy, God is great, and has control on all things, then why this world has so much trouble? So now if we're going to ask, oh God, what was your mind when you brought this kingdom into being? And he says he created death and life, the two aspects of life and death. For what purpose? To try and test all of you, to see which of you are the best in conduct. That's the sole purpose of coming into this planet Earth, so that we can be on this constant trial of life and death, which is the greatest test.
In other words, according to our Muslim brothers, Allah brings us into this world to test us. We live in a life of constant trials with the presence of evil because we are being tested. Tested for what? Again, if you dig deeper into this tradition of faith, we are tested to be separated. Those who live righteously in the presence of evil and stay with Allah, they're going to go to heaven. And those who don't pass the test that is apparent in this life on earth will not see heaven. That's why we have the presence of evil and suffering in this world today, because there is evil. Let's go to argument number two, which is the Christian faith argument. What is their view or reasoning to justify the presence of evil in this world?
If God is a God of love, then why is the world full of suffering and death?
Well, God did not create the world full of suffering and death the way it is today. The Bible tells us that God created a perfect world. There was no death, no disease, no pain, no suffering. But Adam rebelled against God, and that act of rebellion cut himself off from relationship with God. If you cut yourself off from the source of all life, the only option is death. And so now we live in a world that is marred, it's broken, it's a fallen version of that beautiful world that God once created.
In other words, for the Christian faith, we are living in a broken world full of suffering and pain and death because of man's choice. Adam, the first man to be created, made a decision to cut himself from God by sinning against God, by doing what is evil. And since he cut himself from the presence of God, there is suffering in this world. The whole world is broken. The system, the catastrophes we face, the hurricanes, landslides, and the disasters happen because we live in a foreign world. And because of that, there is pain and suffering. Does that answer the question why God allows it to happen though? Let's keep going. Now let's have argument number three, again from our Muslim brothers. Listen up.
If there's a God, Why all of this chaos in the world? Tornadoes, earthquakes, they have increased in intensity just like Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said they would. Tremendous number of earthquakes today. Several hundred earthquakes have happened since I've been giving you this speech right now. Along with that, pestilence, violence, wars, occupations, and family abuse. Serious problems. So if there's a God, why is all that stuff happening? It means the person asking the question doesn't even have the basic understanding of what Islam taught. Islam never taught us that this was the Jannah. Huh? What? You thought you were in paradise? Look what Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said. He summed it up with one of the simplest, most beautiful little teachings you could ever imagine. Ad-dunya sijnul mu'min wa jannatul kafir. This material existence that we're in, called hayat dunya, life of this world, is a prison to a true believer. But it's the only paradise to a disbeliever. He narrowed it down to two things: believers and disbelievers. We know as believers that this is the hardest thing we're going to go through. Because when this is over, that's it. It's done. You're not going to be put in any more tests. But you start seeing the results of the tests. You know how that goes. But for the disbeliever, this is their paradise. And that's why they want so desperately to build the big things here. And the fancy cars, the beautiful homes, the best of clothes. You know what I'm saying? You know, strut your stuff, baby. Okay. This is what they're looking for. Two people will be brought on the day of judgment. One of them, he had everything he asked for in this life. Even to the extent when he was dying, he wanted a feast set before him, and he got it. The other person, he didn't get anything he asked for. Even to the extent when he was about to die, all he asked for was just a drink of water. And he didn't even get that. Now on the day of judgment, the one who had everything, he would be pushed into the hellfire. Like you put a needle in something and pull it out. Just in that instant. Whoop, whoop. He would be asked, remember, he had everything. In your whole life, did you ever see any good? He'd say, well, Lord, in my whole life, I never saw anything good. It wiped it all out. The other man that had nothing, suffered in this life, would be put into paradise. Like you put a pin in something and pull it out. And then he would be asked, in your whole life, did you ever see anything bad? He would say, well, why? In my whole life, I never saw anything bad. No hardships. So why this guy who had everything has to go to hell, and why the other guy goes to paradise? Nobody is perfectly good, and nobody's perfectly bad. The man who had everything in this life, actually he was a very bad person. Allah hated him. So we don't have that concept, by the way. God is love and He loves everything and everybody, no matter how bad they are. No, 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 no. We know that God is the loving, al-wadud, and ready to love anything and everything that's good, but He's also capable of washadid al-iqab, dealing it out heavy duty, and you don't want to know about that. So this man who Allah hated, who had done so many monstrously bad things to people, yet he did some good deeds. So Allah paid him in this life for his good deeds. So he would not even smell the paradise. That he could be thrown directly right straight into hell. The other man, this gentleman, actually was very good. And Allah loved him. But he did some bad things. He made some mistakes. But because Allah doesn't want him to even smell the hellfire, not even for a nanosecond, so Allah let him have his punishment here in this dunya so that he could go straight into the paradise. stop and think about it. Doesn't that make sense?
Again, from the Muslim tradition, from our Muslim brothers, some people get blessings and they get a chance to enjoy a good life, apparently without suffering or bad things happening to them, because they did some good deeds and Allah repaid them in the present life. But they also did some bad things, because there's no one who is perfectly good and perfectly bad. We all have some good and some bad. But for those who suffered horribly on earth, but they also did some good things, but they were not able to enjoy life on earth, Allah never allowed them to smell hell. He gave them eternity in heaven. So in other words, Allah values the good things and the bad things and puts them on a scale and weighs them. And either He allows you to face a catastrophe on earth, maybe that's when your hometown gets hit by a tsunami, maybe. But in other words, if you do bad things, you're going to suffer horribly on earth. But if you do good things, Allah may choose to bless you in this present life on earth. So, how do we answer the question of children who are born with diseases? Children who are 5 years old, they don't even understand what's going on in the world, but they get diseases like cancer. Does He seriously answer our question of why there is evil and bad things happening, even to good people? Does it answer the question? I don't know. Let's now look at another argument from the Christian faith. Listen up again.
If God is so loving and so powerful, then why do you suffer so much? Doesn't God care? Or is He simply too weak to do anything about it? First part of the answer is, I do not know. And one of my thoughts on the issue is this, which I think is very biblical. God chose to limit His power by creating us with a free will, which means I can either pull out my wallet and give you money to eat lunch, or I can roll this hand into a fist, send it crashing into your handsome face. And what the Bible teaches is in Genesis chapter 1, God created us in His image, which means we are not robots, we're not machines. And I like to walk, so if I stumble and fall off of this stage, I'm not going to pick myself up at the bottom and say, phew, I'm glad that's over with. That's determinism. That's fatalism. God creates us in His image, which means we're not robots. And if we want to abuse our free will, we can go right ahead and do it. But there will be a day of judgment when God promises to hold us responsible for the free decisions that we have made. Life is unfair. God is fair. Do not get the two mixed up. If there is no God, you just are a chemical reaction between your two ears. So the bottom line question is, do you have God's solution to the very real problem of suffering and pain? Do you have Jesus Christ?
From the Christian perspective, God created everything good and beautiful, and everything was perfect. And God created humanity in His own image. In other words, we have the ability to have emotions and intellect and a will and a free will, the ability to make decisions, and man chose to walk away from God. So, because of that, sin came into the world, and man, because of his free will, walked away from God. And there is suffering because of that, because man sinned against God and the world is broken. Almost still like the same first argument. But at the end, he says, God is just and fair. But the things that are happening in this world that God is allowing to happen are unfair. But that does not make God unfair, because He's good and everything that He created was very good. And that's according to the book of Genesis. But then at the end of the argument, he says, in the midst of suffering and a broken world, God offers a solution, Jesus Christ. And he says, if you have Jesus Christ, in the midst of suffering, He is the solution, because He will give the world redemption. Again, that's according to the Christian faith. Let me know your perspective in the comments below and what argument stood out for you. God bless you. See you in the next video.